Remember those old yellow and grey Metrorail trains? Well, the passenger rail agency is shelling out billions of your and I's tax monies to refurbish them. The thing is, many of these ancient train sets are not ferrying people to and from work. They're being left to rot in train stockyards. And News24 investigative journalist Sipho Masondo is pushing to figure out why.
That's really at the key of this story, Graham. Why is Prasa fixing these old trains? What is the business case? What is the rationale for this?
Our full conversation coming up next. Later in the show, a Gauteng hero plucks a little girl from a deadly shack fire. And finally, cheating on your partner may be wrong, but despite online claims, it's not a crime in South Africa.
To stay tuned to The Lead for every edition, hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels.
You can also get in touch by mailing us, thelead@24.com. My name's Graham Robenheimer. Let's chat all this and more right here on The Lead on News24. It's one thing to maintain a fleet. In fact, some would argue it should be encouraged. But it's another thing altogether when what's being maintained is not being used to its full potential. Because for the passenger rail agency, its new fleet of blue and white electric trains are currently carrying out the bulk of Metrorail's, albeit limited trips. And the older trains are no longer needed. So what are we missing here? Investigative journalist Sipho Masondo joins me now from our Johannesburg studios. Sipho, thank you so much for your time and welcome back to The Lead. I really do appreciate it. Last year, Prasa had signed on law firm Weber Wenzel to investigate the old rolling stock refurbishment program here. It was following, of course, allegations at the time of kickbacks and corruption in this process. What does the draft report reveal now? And obviously, that has formed the basis of your main investigative report, currently trending on the front page of News24.
Hi, greetings, Graham. Thanks for having me. So this is quite a thick report, Graham. It's got about 400 pages. You can imagine it looks like a book. So I had to read all of that and make sense of it and try and come up with a few stories. So there will be a few stories out of that report over the next couple of weeks or so. But today, as you correctly pointed out, we are focusing on the fact that the report has found that that around about 2022, Prasa appointed about 7 companies to fix and repair and overhaul the old stock, the old yellow and grey trains that many of us know. I actually used a lot of those during my high school years. So they came up with a project.
In university as well. I didn't enjoy the overcrowded ones, but please continue.
I didn't enjoy it, but it's just very how interesting that, Graham, when things work perfectly normal, in a world where things work perfectly normal, you don't notice that you have something that works perfectly. For example, the trains. I mean, I use the train. I remember that literally every day, every weekday, I had to be at the station at 7:10, and if you are there, literally 1 or 2 minutes later, you would miss the train. But we are in a world now where there are no trains, stations have been vandalized, and depots and all that. But anyway, back to the topic, Graham. So in 2022, Prasa decided that to appoint companies to overhaul the old and yellow and grey trains that we've just spoken about now, and then they awarded the contracts to about 7 companies. But one of the key findings of Weber Wenzel's report, as you've correctly pointed out, that the following allegations of corruption and that some of Prasa's executives were receiving kickbacks from the contractors. Then Prasa decided to appoint Weber Wenzel to conduct the investigation. And then one of the findings, Graham, is that after receiving the trains that have been fixed by the contractors, or after the contractors have fixed the trains, Prasa does not use them. They just take them and pack them in their different depots across the country. In Gauteng, in Johannesburg, it will probably be in Braamfontein, in the Cape, I don't know, maybe Salt River or something like that.
Correct.
Yeah, so they just take them, they fix them at a huge cost. When the report was concluded, when the report was authored, Prasa had paid at least 2.5 billion. And so they're fixing all these trains, but they're not using. They take them after you're fixing them. They don't use them. They take them and pack them in these depots where they rot and face a risk of being vandalized.
Sure. And I think it's very important thus then to point out that at this stage you've got a very handy graph with our colleague Charlene putting together all the figures to make it sort of more digestible for our readers to understand. Of the 244 train sets or coaches that have thus been refurbished by these 7 companies, Sipho, your investigative work to look at the finer details of that Weber-Wenzel report has found that only thus 50 of the yellow and grey and black train sets of old have since been refurbished and are currently in use. Is that right? Which of those provinces still see some of those old trains on the tracks? Because I must be honest with you, I don't often see any of them here in the Western Cape. It's mostly the new blue and white electric trains that I'm seeing on the Western Cape tracks.
So according to the report, Graham, it says that in Gauteng, there's not a single of those 250 coaches that have been refurbished, and none of them are in Gauteng. And then it says that none of them are in KwaZulu-Natal, because Prasa also has operations there. And then in the Eastern Cape, there are only 2 trains, one in East London and the other in Gibela. It's about 18 coaches. And the rest of the 250, 32 coaches are being used in Cape Town, and that's about 8 trains. So you can see that the use of these trains is quite very, very, very limited. Yeah. So then it begs the question: why is Prasa fixing all these trains? What's the business case for this project?
Well, let's go through the timeline, Sipho. In 2014, we know that Prasa had signed this deal with the Gibela Rail Consortium, and that's to build these new blue and white trains, right? The idea was to build 600 passenger trains. That's quite a lot. And of that, your reporting has shown that we've since received, for South Africans to use, 268 new trains. But Prasa's actually revealed to you, which I thought was very, very interesting, that only 142 have been in use. So why then are we then refurbishing all these old trains? And your reporting actually shows that that was a directive instituted by the previous Prasa leadership, led by the former acting group CEO, David Mpelo, right? Which year was that, and what did they set out to do?
That's really at the key of this story, Graham. Why is Prasa fixing these old trains? What is the business case? What is the rationale for this? I mean, this project started around about, I think the tender was advertised around 2019, 2020, and then all the processes unfolded, the evaluation of the bid, and there were delays and stuff, and eventually these contracts were awarded in June 2022. And it's very interesting, Graham, that in April 2022, the former chief executive of Prasa, David Mpelo, and the former Prasa chairman, Leonard Ramatlakane, wrote a memo to Fikile Mbalula asking him to approve or asking for his concurrence for the project to be signed. But at that very moment, when they wrote this memo to the former minister, Fikile Mbalula, already, Prasa was already receiving these new trains from Gibela, and they were not using all of them, right? Like that particular moment when they sent this memo to the minister, they were already receiving the new trains from Gibela, and they're not even using all of them. So the question is, when you're not even using the new trains that you're receiving from Gibela, why are you now fixing these trains? What is the purpose of you fixing these trains?
And the argument for many South Africans might be, well, the devil you do, the devil you don't, right? What do you do thus with all of these old trains might be the sort of devil's advocate way of looking at things, right? But the fact of the matter is that there's a huge number of them that are currently lying in rot at the stockyards, right? They've gone through the process and they're not on the tracks because they're simply not in need. And I think that also speaks to the level of which where Prasa currently finds itself. We know that it didn't get the full stake of the budget that it wanted in the budget 3.0 that Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana just recently tabled. So that their figure was revised. It was slashed down a little bit. So they're not getting the full amount that they were supposed to. And we know that all lines here, and for the Western Cape, and I can speak from my knowledge here, you'd be better placed in the Gauteng area to be able to explain what it looks like there. But I can tell you for a fact that the Monte Vista line, which runs concurrently to the Northern line, those stations, there are many that remain shuttered. They have not been reopened since, because Prasa is waiting for the new financial year to get underway, to get its piece of the budget so that it can refurbish those lines to get more trains running on, for example, the Monte Vista line, because I live along those lines. So I hear maybe one, possibly two trains during the course of a day if I'm at home. And I'm being dead honest, many of those stations remain shuttered. So it does sort of beg the question then that we just have too many trains, but perhaps the infrastructure is not keeping up. You then also reported in previously your Derailed investigation, Sipho, about those two questionable contracts that were thus put forward by Prasa and awarded in regards to upgrading the digital train signalling equipment. Once that's installed, you can't use the old yellow trains anymore because they're old. They're not going to work with this new digital train signaling equipment anyway, right?
Absolutely, Graham. I mean, we know that Prasa has launched a multi-million rand drive to refurbish infrastructure, or to modernize its infrastructure, as it were. And that includes refurbishing depots, that includes digitizing train signaling equipment. We know that the yellow and grey fleet is not going to be compatible with the new infrastructure that Prasa is building. So the question again, sorry I keep coming to this, is why on earth are you fixing these trains? You know, this is a lot of money that Prasa is going to spend refurbishing these trains. All in total, it's like 7.5 billion, Graham. That's a hell of a lot of money that Prasa could invest in modernizing infrastructure, could invest in refurbishing the infrastructure that was damaged, the trains, the stations that you're talking about, the depots that have been damaged. That's a lot of money that Prasa could use to fix infrastructure, because these trains, they're just fixing them. They're not going to be compatible with the new infrastructure, so they're just taking them and going to pack them in these depots. I would argue that maybe Prasa could have sold the trains as they were, you know, when they decided to decommission these grey and yellow trains. Maybe sell them out there to other African countries and let the people fix them for themselves and use them, you know. But fixing them and then packing them in your depots, it just doesn't make any financial or business sense. I mean, maybe, or even take the trains and sell them for scrap metal. I mean, scrap metal is quite very expensive. So Prasa could have raised quite a significant amount of money if it just decided to scrap these trains and then sell them for scrap metal.
Yeah, in my mind's eye, selling them to our SADC partners would have made more sense here. And I don't know if we're missing something. It would be interesting to see what Prasa then decides to do with this massive sort of refurbishment program and the surplus of old trains. But Prasa also says, Sipho, and I found this incredibly amusing, that it wants to be able to ferry 60 million South Africans via daily trips throughout the country in the financial year 2024-2025. And it's only able at the moment to get around 19.7 million, as per your findings in the graphs that you have put up in your report for today. I mean, that seems awfully lofty.
Look, it's somebody. I think somebody said then they were dreaming of all these of all these things and the number of people they can ferry. I mean, if in the 2023 fiscal year they only ferried 19.7 million, what is the likelihood that they are going to be able to get to that number, Graham? It's almost close to impossible. They're not going to be able to get to that number. But I guess the argument can be made that there's nothing that stops them from trying to get to that number.
I think you were always going to have a difficult time, Sipho, with the fact that Weber Wenzel's report which has constituted the bedrock of many of the findings that you've illuminated in your report today, you weren't going to get a lot of comment from the relevant stakeholders, right? You haven't enjoyed much luck in getting people to talk about the findings thus far, right?
Well, no, I haven't. Prasa itself said that, look, this is what, state-owned institutions and government departments, this is what they always say when they're found with, they're caught with their pants down and they don't know what to say. They just, specifically as far as investigations are concerned, they'll just tell you that, sorry, this report is in a draft form, and once it's finalized, then we'll be able to take action. But we know that's a lot of nonsense. With my own experiences, is that there's actually quite very, very, very little, quite more often than not, there's very little difference between a draft report and a final report. In fact, more often than not, just a few weeks after releasing a draft report, these companies, they go on to release a final report, and I'm told by my sources at Prasa that Weber Wenzel has since released a final report, but Prasa executives are just sitting on that report. They're not acting on the recommendations. I must add, Graham, that some of these recommendations are quite hard-hitting. We'll get into some of those issues when we do subsequent stories, but they have recommended that some of these expenditure on these trains should be declared as fruitless and wasteful expenditure. They have recommended criminal charges against some of the executives. So there's a wide variety of recommendations from the report, but it doesn't look like Prasa is doing anything. And I do think that the Minister of Transport, Barbara Creecy, should really hold people accountable. And I think she should disband this board because it's quite clearly a very useless board.
In the meantime, I wish for a day where the local train station in my particular Cape Town suburb on the Monte Vista line will be reopened again, so that I can perhaps leave my house and be fortunate to be one of those South Africans who can go and climb onto a train into Cape Town, and I don't have to spend so much on petrol and the upkeep of my vehicle and all of those things, and I can also enjoy a blue and white train coming into town. Do you feel the same way?
Look, I grew up in Soweto, where I used the trains quite extensively, but unfortunately now I live in Pretoria, so I don't get to use the trains that much. But transportation, a proper and efficient transportation system is quite very key to a modern economy, Graham. And I would, if I had a means, or if there was railway from my house to my workplace, I would have no reason to be using a car, But now I'm forced to use a car because we don't have a proper functioning railway system in this country.
And we were saying just before the interview, in 2017, for example, the last quoted figures that I used to get from trade unionists and other role players in the rail industry was that Cape Town Central Line, right, which runs towards Khayelitsha, that on average used to bring in 250,000 Cape Townians into town, working class Cape Townians into the heart of the city, a city that struggles with apartheid spatial planning, that keeps people out. It brings those people into the city in order to do their work, and I don't see that those numbers are the same as what they used to before. We have had obviously issues since the pandemic which relate to people living and squatting on the tracks along the way. Again, a part of the socioeconomic issues that we have to deal with in this country, and of course, criminals preying on the infrastructure, etc. Do you feel like there has been an uptick again in the number of people in Gauteng taking trains, or just do you not see it yet?
So I don't know, Graham. I really can't say if there is an uptick, but according to Prasa, there is an uptick, albeit quite very, very small. I guess what Prasa should do is just to continue and refurbish the infrastructure that was vandalized during the COVID years. They must just really, because also, the public transport system, Graham, is not for profit, So Prasa should not be out there seeking to make money out of transporting people to and fro their workplaces and their homes. So Prasa should just continue investing on rebuilding the infrastructure and keep marketing it so that people will go back and use rail and use it, in fact, like they did before the COVID years and before the infrastructure was damaged.
And of course, if the city of Cape Town gets its way, it would be thus in charge of the rail system here in the metro, and possibly, legislation could change down the line in which cities then become the sort of rail operators in their respective sort of municipal demarcations, right? That is something that could potentially happen down the line, right?
It could happen, and I think it will. I think it's better that way, because when you have this centralized system, I don't think it's good, because then you have this one entity responsible for quite a very big. A country like ours is quite very big, and if you have one, across the world, how transport systems works is they're run by the local municipality. So I don't see why South Africa would not benefit from a decentralized system where the Cape Metro is responsible, or the province is responsible for the rail infrastructure in that province, and eThekwini is responsible for the rail infrastructure in that city. And I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, but those 6 companies might not like it being decentralized, Sipho.
Not just those 6 companies, Graham, but also the people at Prasa. As it is, Prasa, it's a very big institution. So it's a small number of people that run all the systems, and so they are able to direct how Prasa should work, and they're able to award tenders to their friends and families and colleagues and all that, But if then you decentralize it, then you take away that power from them, and then they're not able to continue using some of these big projects as means to extract from the company. So as much as it's definitely going to be a good thing if we decentralize the system, but I don't see not only government doing it, but I see also that there will be a very big resistance from Prasa itself.
And the working class suffers in the meantime. Derailed, it's part of the Derailed series. Prasa blows 2.5 billion rand. Billion, not million, billion. Fixing trains and then discards them to rot in depots, is the report by Sipho Masondo, our exclusive on the front page of News24 today. Fantastic work as always. I can't wait to see what the comment will be once, as you say, the draft report becomes sort of final. It's going to be interesting to see how Prasa can move from here. And of course, we look forward to being able to take a train to and from work in future. Sipho, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Have a fantastic day.
Thanks, Graham. Thanks for having me.
To our trending topic now, and it's a tragic story that happens far too often in South Africa during winter. A family of 6 sadly perished in a shack fire in the Marikana informal settlement in Gauteng in the early hours of Monday morning. But as News24 journalist Ntwahai Saleka reports, a nearby neighbor sprang into action hoping to save them. Klaas Mabena woke to loud bangs and cut his right thumb trying to remove corrugated iron sheets from the burning back of the shack to assist the family inside. The kitchen door was locked. Thankfully, Mabena managed to pluck 7-year-old Kiabetswe Pasla from the fire, but she sustained severe burns. She was later rushed to hospital by another resident, whilst our hero Mabena struggled to extinguish the flames. Soon, locals called out the brother of the family's father, who tells us that the sight of their bodies being removed will haunt him forever. The cause of the fire is not yet known, and we're waiting to hear about progress in the little girl's recovery. Last week, Johannesburg Emergency Services warned the public against leaving heat sources unattended during the colder months. Stay safe, Mzansi. And finally, South Africa's social media streets have been awash with unverified claims recently that starting in 2026, married partners caught cheating may face jail time. TikTok videos making this claim are racking up thousands of views online. But speaking to News24 Life's Marilyn Manuel, Cape Town-based lawyer Joachelo Modisakeng clarifies that whilst infidelity is enough to file for divorce, it can't land you in prison. Simply put, the country's courts, she finds, do not recognize an extramarital affair as a criminal act. However, an affair may serve as evidence in divorce proceedings. Still, memes and videos have abounded online to conjure up the alleged South African Marriage Act amendment. The comment sections have been robust enough, with plenty of support for such a move, whilst others worry South Africa's legal system is not effective enough to police cheating. Either way, count on News24 to debunk disinformation daily. Well, from our trifling train situation to a hero's Monday saving a little girl's life, it's the start of a brand new week right here in Mzansi. We received a flurry of emails in response to our last panel discussion held on Thursday. That was, of course, looking at the fallout from the Presidents Trump and Ramaphosa meeting in the White House. Alan Newbury writes the following quote: "With reference to the so-called ambush of the South African delegation by Donald Trump, it is disgusting that your left-wing condemnation of Trump's action gives the impression that the murder of over 1,000 farmers who feed the nation with hard work and toil is a trivial matter. I yet to hear Ramaphosa or any of his party condemn the farm murders. It is swept under the carpet. If it were the other way around, the ANC would be screaming racist murders. Malema and the like should have jailed for his rants, instead being excused by the ineffectual courts of the land. The murder rate in South Africa is unbelievable, and one of the reasons why thousands of teachers, nurses, doctors, engineers, and other professionals have left or leaving this country." Thank you so much, Alan, for your email there. Flip van Sale writes the following. Quote, "Morning, my suggestion as an old police member, bring back the death sentence. This ANC has too long in charge. Bring back the death sentence. If one look at the way our kids die in this country by gun-related cases, in the olden days, if someone who planned to murder someone give them the death sentence, they deserve it. Now the gallows in Pretoria is a museum. Reset the gallows so they can do away with criminals. Jails are full of the scum, overcrowded jails. That's my advice. A concerned citizen, PJ van Sale." Petrus Labuskachny also writes the following in this mail. "The only way to reset crime and farm attacks is to upgrade arrest possibilities by incorporating GPF Beurtwacht," I assume the neighborhood watch, that's my comment to add, and to continue, quote, "and all other sections to have same arrest authority as SAP police reservists. Arrest criminals and take them to police station. Let reservist function as the commando did before they were scrapped. Reservists could do all patrol functions in towns and farms. This worked before, but permanent police is not interested in reservists. All new recruits for permanently police must come out of reservists," writes PW Labuskachny. And then Timothy Madolo writes the following. "Hi, I'm Annual. My comment is that those whites that they've created their own situation by hiring foreigners into their farms for cheap labor. Now the cheap labor are killing them. It is time the SAPS must visit the farmers." And that's the Lead's email, thelead@24.com, all caught up. Thank you so much for engaging in our last discussion as you've done. We've received fantastic response to that panel chat. Of course, if you'd like to be reminded of our upcoming episodes this week, you can hit the follow and subscribe buttons on our Spotify, Apple, and YouTube podcast channels. Well, my name's Graham Rowe, but I'm in. So long as there's news, we'll have the lead.